Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Hope you enjoyed that fascinating discussion on the smart cars, smart homes, smart cities.
Indeed.
We have with us Nick Muller, is professor of economics, engineering, and public policy. All three, huh, Nick?
All three, indeed.
So, what did you think of the discussion?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think the panelists raised a lot of important points for us to think about.
There are a lot of advantages that will come from the smart revolution and a lot of concerns. Some of the concerns expressed by the panel, lack of privacy, increase in economic inequality, the fact that some people are going to be left behind, labor disruptions. Some people were a little bit more optimistic and some people are a little bit more pessimistic on a panel. Where are you?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted issue. And in my expertise lying in areas related to environmental impacts of consumption and production, I tend to be a little bit more on the optimistic side.
Right.
Because we tend to think about this revolution moving us away from traditional ways of making and consuming things to ways that are a little bit perhaps more green or environmentally conscious.
In fact, you've done research on the kind of power savings and reduction in pollution that could occur by using smart technologies. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. In prior work, we've looked at the use and deployment of electric vehicles. And in places where those electric vehicles are plugging into grids that are comprised of renewable fuels or natural gas, we see that the environmental and public health advantages of those technologies are far and above those of conventional internal combustion engines.
What do the numbers look like?
On average, for a vehicle like a Ford Focus, when compared to the internal combustion engine Ford Focus, we see a lifetime benefit of that vehicle of around $5,000 in the year $2,000 when it's used in a western state where the grid is clean.
Now, one stray fact out of the discussion really intrigued me. A single Bitcoin transaction requires the power equivalent for an entire home for a month. That is just mind-blowing.
It is. I heard Professor Apt refer to 900 kilowatt hours. We've found in my research that when those kilowatt hours are produced by burning coal in the US, they generate damages of about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you think about how many transactions there are at 900 kilowatt hours apiece, we're talking about big environmental impacts just from Bitcoin.
That's remarkable. Now, Nick, I hear you are involved in the creation of a Carnegie Mellon coin based on a new technology. Is that right?
What coin is that you're referring to in particular?
It's sort of a Bitcoin for Carnegie Mellon, right?
I'm not aware of that.
That's something you might want to get involved in then.
I think I might. I'd be sure to make sure that those transactions are happening on a clean grid, however.
Yes, indeed. So what are the takeaways for you?
Big takeaways here are we have to think about broadly the implications of our choices, our technology choices, our production choices, our consumption choices. Secretary Fox mentioned that we'd like to think about deploying these technologies, but we have to do it in a way that we don't just turn these devices and these approaches loose on their own. We have to think about regulation, we have to think about wise use and management and goals, and often that means blending approaches that are both public and private. And when I think about the implications of that from my perspective, that means thinking carefully about impacts of exposure to pollutants, of the generation of waste, both across the income scale and across races and ages as well.
I mean, another point he made that I think really resonated with me was the fact that smart technology requires smart government.
It does.
And it's something that I hadn't really thought about, but clearly this is a field that's going to be heavily regulated. Smart mayors, smart governors, smart legislators will be very involved in how these technologies get deployed and what gets deployed, how they behave toward these technologies, and one, might think that there could be a political response here may not be very helpful, to put it mildly.
So I'm going to step back and say, when I introduce students that I teach here to roles of government, I try to note that there's a spectrum of degrees of intervention and then modes of intervention, from direct control to nudges and ways to just affect behavior at the margin, taxes, subsidies, fees, rebates, things like that. And I think what we heard today from the panel, and in particular from Secretary Fox, is that smart government is probably going to involve nuanced approaches that are not one size fits all, but that are tailored to particular situations, be they in particular states or regions or in particular periods of time for particular technologies. And if I was to opine or suggest how I would interpret what the panel said with respect to these new technologies, I would lean in that direction. Careful, smart, measured, evidence-based approaches to public policy.
I think the tricky thing of all this is how there will be disruption and there will be hiccups in the beginning. I love the story by the CFO of Amazon, who 3 years ago brings the beta version of Alexa into his home, gathers his family around the device, and asks the question, Alexa, who's the CFO of Amazon? And the machine responds, the CFO of Amazon is Jeff Bezos, and he puts the device in the closet. Clearly, every early use of any new technology has problems.
Indeed.
And the big issue is, do the problems turn off the user in a way that stifles innovation?
True, true. So another point that's related to this is thinking about the implications of those choices and uptake of those technologies across both the user directly and affected parties that aren't privy to that transaction or privy to that behavior. And that's something, again, that has come up time and again in the panelist discussion. Professor App talking about the impacts of coal-fired power relative to some of the newer, different ways that we're making power. That's not going to be embedded in market signals. That's not going to be revealed in the signals and the costs that participants are responding to. And we need to think carefully about how new technologies affect both persons in the transaction and persons outside of the transaction.
And Nick, clearly you are an optimist.
Indeed.
You research in this field. When you have your classes and your students are there, are they optimists as well, or are they pessimists? Where are they on the scale in terms of how they think about these changes that are about to occur?
Sure. So of course there's a mix, right? But in general, I think I find this generation as more towards the optimist side about technology in particular than towards the pessimist side. Sometimes I'll take an opportunity to remind them that here we are in Pittsburgh, where 45 years ago we had quite a revolution in one of the major industries here, and there was a lot of pain.
Indeed.
Right? There was a lot of dislocation. But we've come a long way. Folks have responded, they've relocated, some in, some out, and we've ended up in a very good place. And so when we think about those technological and market-based revolutions, we need to keep that balanced perspective. But in general, I think the students are optimists.
That's great to hear, because you're going to be leading a lot of this, obviously.
Indeed, I hope to. I hope to.
Nick, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you
you
very
so
much.
much.
Indeed.
All right, I just want to explain, too, what's going to be going on here all day long. We're going to bring in some of the panelists who've been on the stage. We're going to bring you some students, some faculty members as well, to talk about the Tepper School, the experience here, why they're here, and really exploring the theme of the day, the intersection between business, technology, and society. So we have next up Raj Kumar. Great panel.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure.
So what were your takeaways from this discussion today?
We had a very distinguished panel. We had the former Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, who actually led the U.S. DOT's efforts on autonomous vehicles as well as smart cities. We also had the Chief Financial Officer of Amazon talking about smart devices at the home, namely Alexa. We actually had Humaira Akbari, an entrepreneur who actually serves on multiple Fortune 500 companies,
Yes.
talking about sensors, if you will, for underwater systems, water management systems, sewage systems. And lastly, we actually had Professor Jay Apt, who is a professor at CMU, but is an expert on electric grids. So this panel was about the confluence of making homes smarter, cars smarter, and cities smarter. So it was a lovely, engaging, insightful discussion.
And there were things to be cheerful about and things to really worry about in the panel.
Yes, indeed. As we all know, thanks to smartphones, wireless technologies, and such, computing becoming cheaper and cheaper, our lifestyles are increasingly digital in nature. And that digital aspect is beginning to pervade into the physical realm as well, right? So where our homes are becoming smarter, our electric meters are smarter, the cities are becoming smarter. So I guess there are multiple societal benefits. Hopefully over time, congestion can be brought down as cities become smarter. You actually can interact with your television like the CFO from Amazon actually talked about.
Yes.
Much easier ways to do with that. You can actually make sure that your kids at home are safe, if you will. And then, so meanwhile, cars, if they can drive themselves, it can reduce or even eliminate the fatalities and injuries that actually occur. It can improve the quality of life for elderly people who cannot drive, legally blind people and disabled people who cannot drive. So there are multiple large-scale societal benefits. So the panel was excited about these transformations. At the same time, we also talked about concerns where privacy was a concern, where basically are we giving up our privacy for
Indeed.
these benefits. The second question was that there are malicious people, entities out there. Can they bring down this infrastructure and basically shutting us down? Maybe 3-4 decades from now, we don't know how to drive because vehicles drive themselves. But now, if somebody hacks into the system, takes it down, we cannot move anymore. And the same thing can happen with your home. The furnace gets shut down during winter, and the AC gets shut down during summer. Will not be good. So clearly, there are problems to be addressed both on the positive side and the negative side.
Indeed. How does your own research relate to the discussion that we heard today?
Very much coupled with that, which is why they picked me as the moderator. I am a professor at CMU myself in computer engineering, the Heinz College of Public Policy, and robotics as well. So my personal research is in the area of self-driving automated vehicles. So I've been active in that domain for more than 15 years.
And Carnegie Mellon is a leader in that area.
We consider ourselves to be a birthplace of this technology,
Exactly.
dating literally back to 1983. And we actually entered this competition in 2007, conducted by DARPA, the US military's research arm. That competition was the one that literally triggered this flood of activities that we've been seeing over the past few years. The team from Carnegie Mellon actually won the competition. So we have very credible presence in this particular space. So that's at the core of what I do. But then I actually also play a management role, if you will, of coordinating activities in intelligent transportation. I direct 2 national university transportation centers, one on safety, one on mobility, and both of them are sponsored by the U.S. Department of Transportation. So I've known Secretary Fox even before. Turns out that I also direct Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute, which is CMU's campus-wide organization looking at bringing together people, technology, and policy to transform metropolitan life as we know it, to improve dramatically the quality of life in metropolitan regions.
So let's move forward 10 years from now.
Yes.
Someone on the panel suggested that in 10 years, driverless trucks will be a reality on our highways. Someone in the audience worried that it would drive hundreds of thousands of people out of jobs. One point was made that there is actually a shortage of long-haul truck drivers. And while those people might be dislocated, their services could be of use within the cities, which are going to grow in size and in people. What do you see 10 years from now?
So that's a great question. With automation, some jobs will go away, but economies are very dynamic, very adaptive, and new jobs do get created. The other point that was made was that in the turn of the 19th century, more than 90% of the US population was engaged in agriculture one way or the other.
Indeed.
Today, we have 2% of the population actually engaged in agriculture. And meanwhile, if you go back to the turn of the 19th century or in the 20th century, most women used to stay at home. Today, more women are in the workforce than men. So
True.
essentially, the workforce has doubled, and the unemployment rate today is at a record low. Right. So basically, what it says is the economy is really evolved. When automation comes in, the level of activity for humans actually goes up to the level where computers can actually handle that responsibility. So I do expect that these truck drivers, for example, they likely have to go through a retraining program, a job education program of some kind, at which point in time they'll probably be out there diagnosing and fixing things that go wrong with trucks, with automated trucks, and therefore they may lead actually live a better quality of life because they're not out of leaving their family for weeks at a time, driving all across the country, and they actually probably will get paid higher as well.
Well, this goes to the point that Brian of Amazon made.
Yes.
A few years ago when Amazon acquired a robotics company, and people feared that it would put a lot of their people out of work.
Kiva
And
robots.
In fact, what it did in the warehouse was it eliminated all the picking and walking. Some employees were walking as long as 10 miles a day to pick stuff off shelves. Now the robots do it. And actually, there's been no shortage of jobs in those warehouses, and those jobs have actually improved for human beings.
Absolutely, that's the perfect example. The same thing actually happens with ATMs. Actually, you go to the airport to check in, you basically have kiosks, but the number of jobs, basically there are actually literally today millions of job openings in the US for which they did not get enough applicants.
You know, Raj, one of the most interesting things about the whole kiosk revolution in airports is that the research showed that customers, preferred their interaction with a kiosk than a human being. Why? Because a human being might show up and be grumpy one day. Yeah. A kiosk isn't grumpy.
Yes. So it's just so that, I guess, and you can get it done quickly when you're in the rush
That's
to
true.
basically catch a flight as well. So that is true, but there are times when things go wrong and a human has to be involved, and that's where the human ingenuity, our human chemistry comes into play.
That's true. Do you use Alexa, Raj?
Actually, it turns out that I do not, but
don't?
my son does.
I got to tell you, it's an amazing device. My daughter recently bought me one, and it wakes me up in the morning. It tells me what the weather's going to be. It gives me a short digest of the news. I'm loving it.
I can imagine, particularly the benefits of it. But as a technologist, I guess I worry about two things, if you will. One is that privacy. I've not convinced myself that I want to give up my privacy yet fully.
Yes.
The other thing is that as a technologist, I also know what could go wrong. So therefore, I worry about malicious attacks into the system and such. So I guess even though I like to be on the cutting edge of technology, I can be a Luddite at times as well.
So, Raj, you're telling me that I need to be careful about what conversations I have in front of Alexa?
So I think that's probably not a bad idea anyway.
Well, Raj, thank you so much, and you did a superb job on the panel.
Thank you,
Really,
John. It was a pleasure talking
congratulations.
to you. Thank you.
It's terrific.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to have another guest before we go to the next panel, and we are pleased to have. Oh, hi there.
Hello,
I'm John.
Homera.
Homera, I really enjoyed your conversations on the panel. You seem to be a bit more of a pessimist than some of the optimists up there. Am I right in interpreting that or not?
No, I don't think so. I mean, pessimist maybe in terms of worrying about the fact that we are not as protected in terms of cybersecurity, but in terms of technology, I believe that it is. I believe in what the technology changes that it would make in the society, and how it's going to impact and bring positive benefit overall.
Right. I mean, you really sounded an alarm on privacy for sure.
As well,
That
yes.
we are not protected at all,
Correct.
and that to think that we are would be a real mistake.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, I already have, for example, for my digital identity, if you like, a manager or somebody who knows how my digital identity is changing and what impact it has everything and what is the sentiment towards me. And that will only continues to be so. So I think that cyberbullying is another area which
Right,
is
that's true.
seriously troublesome. And it's contrary to physical bullying, where it happens at least in a specific place, cyberbullying, which by the way can be through text, not necessarily just chat, can really impact you everywhere and anywhere. So I do think that those are the things to worry about.
Someone in the audience made a really interesting observation. She said that she has conversations with a friend in Silicon Valley who openly wonders whether the technology that he's developing will throw a certain number of people out of work.
Well, the answer is, I think I made a comment there as well. I do think that every time, if you look at the history of technology, every time there has been a revolutionary change in technology, it had actually added jobs.
Yes.
I do think this may not be the case this time around.
Why?
But,
What's so different?
Well, because of automation, extreme level of automation and AI. I think that the really need for human being will decrease, and what I mentioned, there would be a digital divide where people who are very versed in new technologies and software, but also AI and whatnot, will benefit, and people who are not versed and are not able to reach that versatility, they will be left behind. But
And that's already happening to some extent.
it is.
I mean, some people would say one of the reasons Trump was elected is because there's a large part of the population in America that's been left behind.
Partly, although, as you heard, we have a shortage of truck drivers. I want to know if those people
Yes,
out there, why
right.
aren't they I would if I had no other job. But I don't. I think we're not yet in that position because, for example, we don't have enough cybersecurity engineers. We don't have enough software developers, and I would believe and I would think that these people can re-educate themselves. But even as I mentioned, we don't have truck drivers. I'm sure a lot of these people can do that. It is more, I think, the entitlement of these people who are not willing
Right.
to do everything and anything and are waiting there for the good old job to come back versus reinventing themselves to a new way.
Right. There's also, that was brought up on the panel, the involvement of government. Smart technologies need smart governments. And that is not a certainty either.
No, that's correct. There, I do agree with you in a sense that absolutely, I think the government plays a very, very important role. I mentioned in my speech that this morning, France announced that they're going to spend 350 million just to build the infrastructure for bikes. And what they want to do is currently 3% of population is using bike. They want to triple that in 10 years, so that is less than 10 years, actually more like 5 years, so that 9% use it. And that's,
Wow.
so you have to have that. You have to have those initiatives from the government pushing the demographic changes and pushing the habits and behavior changes.
So you aren't a pessimist after all.
I'm never a pessimist. My life is all about optimism.
10 years from now, let's take out your crystal ball and let's make you a fortune teller. What's this world going to look like?
10 years from now. Okay. And so,
One point made in the panel is that in 10 years,
right.
we will see autonomous trucks on the highways, for sure.
Not fully though. Not
Not
level,
fully.
not
Right.
so-called level 5. It would be lower level potentially. And there's definitely will be safety driver in it, that I can promise you. But I think 10 years from now, we will see, that's when my two little nieces who are 5 and 6 years old will be, and they already love Alexa. And,
I love Alexa.
No, I know, but they love it more. Trust me, I can see how they interact with it. But I think that we will see definitely autonomous vehicles. I agree with you. Lower car ridership. And much smart, smart city was the topic we talked about.
Yes.
Many more cities which are smarter and better usage of, I think, space in terms of environmental. The other thing that we didn't talk about is this whole rush towards environmental, what is called ESG, environmental society and governance. And I think that we are. What is amazing to me, so many companies and private sector is becoming so conscious about what it means in terms of, so hopefully we will see the CO2 levels coming down by 2% as well.
Yeah, and that's a much more positive spin on what's going to happen.
That's right.
Lower use of power, much less pollution, and all the jobs that technology is going to generate, because there's going to be a lot of economic activity around that.
That's right.
So now you don't own a car and you live in Dallas.
Yeah.
And people think you're strange because of that. Is that true?
Yes. Whenever I say that, people look at me like, what?
But Secretary Fox actually said there will be a time in the short distance
Yes.
where many people will not be driving cars, and many people may not even learn how to drive a car.
That I believe as well, yes. I mean, I think that's, I worry about that a little bit. I do think people should learn how to drive, because there may be a time, in fact, I do drive, and I do rent a car, but you don't want to decrease your autonomy as a person. And I think knowing how to drive a car is important. So I hope that doesn't, but it may. Just like people don't ride a bike.
Right, and actually that was a point that Secretary Fox brought up, this issue of re-engagement. So when you don't use technology on a regular basis, like drive a car, and you only do it temporarily, you may not be as good a driver.
Yes, well, you're bringing up one other point. There's no question that over time, autonomous vehicles have lower insurance premiums than cars which are driven by a person.
Right.
I mean, a human being is more prone to error than computer, effectively, or autonomous vehicles. So in that sense, that's correct. They could even drive worse, so insurance premiums going up the roof.
Now, Homera, you're an expert in these fields, and you're on the boards of many companies that are leading the technologies that are going to usher in this smart revolution. You have no fear, right? You have no fear of the changes that are going to occur and how society will react to them?
No, I do have fear, but I am a technologist at heart, so I'm very excited when technology changes. But I have fear, and I mentioned, the fear is really privacy, where everything about us is so known that there is nothing left for surprise anymore, and that your lives are too managed and too manipulated. So
and the truth is, this country just went through a major incident involving privacy and the hacking of records that resulted in a presidential election being altered in one way or another.
Yes,
that's pretty. That's a pretty big deal. Above and beyond someone stealing someone's identity or charging up their credit cards, which is also awful and horrible. But to actually potentially sway a presidential election in the biggest country that has a free society and democracy, that is a big deal.
I agree. I'm not able to comment much more.
No, but again, what are the lessons there? The lessons are that the companies that are deploying these technologies do have responsibilities to society and to government and to the free working of a democracy, and that is going to become an increasingly big issue, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I think what you're highlighting is it's not just all about making money, but it's also about making sure that you do have responsibility and you can't be too slow and too ignorant and to fix the problem very early on. So I think that what we're finding is a lot of companies, tech companies specifically, big tech companies who we have a lot of faith in, have not really have misled us. So that's something that has to change.
Homera, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you. I loved hearing your views up on the panel.
Thank you so much.
All right. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. We are here at Intersect at CMU. And we have... Hi there. A pleasure to meet you.
I'm Jerome. I'm the VP of AI at Facebook.
Yes.
And I'll be doing the keynote here today, so in 10 minutes actually. So.
And I'm really looking forward to it. What do you think you're going to say? I hope you know.
I'm going to talk about AI and what we do today at Facebook with it, and kind of what are the challenges we're seeing for the near future.
What are the big concerns about the use of AI, the increasing use of it?
I mean, people are worried, I think on different angles, that one is AI will take their jobs, right? And also that AI will kind of take control of their lives without giving them control. I think the reality is quite different.
Well, as a technologist, you have to be an optimist, right?
That's right. But I will talk actually about some of the challenges and what to address. I think the problem with people's perception of AI is that they may look sometimes at the wrong problem. So people talk a lot about, hey, AI taking over the world and and taking control. That's not going to happen. I can tell you that. I develop AI every day. It's not that good. Okay, so it's not quite there. But there are other problems that I want to talk about around, for example, biases. People have biases, and AI learn from people, and AI tends to reproduce the biases that comes from people. So and maybe sometimes amplify that. So these are real problems.
Indeed. But AI learns from these issues.
Yes, but
I mean, that's the
it learns
point of
from
it, right?
examples.
Yes.
So if the example is bad, it won't get better. So there are some challenges. So you need to create algorithms that are more aware of their own limitation, and you need to analyze the data that you feed into the systems.
I mean, in a way, it's a kind of a new responsibility, even for the companies and the people who develop these technologies, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, a good
With
example.
great power comes great responsibility. Absolutely.
A good example is autonomous vehicles. The software literally has to be programmed to determine, in the event of a fatal accident, who do I save?
That's right.
The people in the car or the pedestrians on the street?
I think, obviously, I'm very familiar with this example. The reality is a bit more complex. There are a lot of parameters that are put in the software. There's never a single decision that's made like this. But what really the system will track is that over time, for example, a self-driving car is much safer than a driver.
Yes, absolutely.
And it will average out over time. And
Sure.
like, for example, if you have an insurance, your insurance will tell you, oh, if you have a driving assistance, I'm going to actually give you a lower insurance. And
Right.
and if you have a car that drives itself more, I will have a lower insurance. So over time, people will realize that, yes, it helps. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to have self-driving car tomorrow, actually, because I think it will be more gradual.
Sure.
But it's not such a black and white situation. The system will
true.
determine, and usually on average, you will see that when you have 1 million drivers, they will actually be better off with an assistance system.
Right. And self-autonomous vehicles do not drink cocktails at bars
That's
late
right.
at night.
They have lots of advantages.
They don't fall asleep at the wheel.
That's right.
And they don't not pay attention.
And they tend to be actually more predictable than humans, actually, for that reason. So as long as you put them in all the necessary conditions and you test them and you train them, you will actually have more predictability. So it's not as bad. There are some, we need to be careful. It's powerful technology, but there are ways to do it right.
Well, I'm really looking forward to your comments
Thanks
today.
for your time.
And thank you for coming
All
by.
right. Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. All right. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. We are at Intersect at CMU. And we have another panelist. Well, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Shavin Yatikin. I'm a faculty member at the Tepper School and also the Senior Associate Dean of Education.
Yes, indeed. We've met before.
Yes, we have.
I enjoyed our conversation very much.
Thank you.
You are here to make a lot happen above and beyond the conference today. Because in many ways, this conference is sort of a harbinger of what the school and the new building is going to be all about, which is basically bringing together people from different disciplines and having them collaborate together to make magic happen.
Absolutely, and you saw that with the very first panel as well. We've intended this building to be the place where CMU, thought leaders, researchers, and our community and our alums come together and try to think through problems that affect society, that affects business. And we've heard from the first panel how complex a lot of these problems are, whether you're
Sure.
coming at it from a business perspective or you're coming at it from a policy perspective, that it's good to understand the technology and understand what kind of technologies we can deploy. But a lot of thought goes into thinking about all of the intended and unintended consequences, inclusiveness. So if you're a business leader, if you're thinking about coming to a school to become the next business leader, you have to think about how to approach these problems in an interdisciplinary way, and that you bring on teams of people who can bring different perspectives and work with you through these issues. And that's what this conference and being able to share this space with everybody here is all about, is to sort of emulate what we try to accomplish
Exactly.
here at the business school.
I mean, the Tepper Quad is more than a building. It is an idea. I think that's what David Tepper said initially.
Correct.
And the idea is to bring together the disciplines of computer science, public policy, engineering, design, the humanities, and have them come and collide with business people to make new and better solutions for society.
Absolutely.
So how do you bring in the computer science people, the engineering people, the public policy people? How do you bring them in, invite them around the table to have these kinds of conversations that lead to meaningful collaborations?
It's actually quite interesting you say that, because that's not as hard as some people think. At CMU, it's not hard. It's actually, people are very primed to do that. I'll give you an example. We've just launched a blockchain initiative at the Tepper School. And we think through a lot of business technology aspects of it, in the markets aspects of it, since we have expertise in finance and economics. And we think about, how cryptocurrencies can be used and what are some of the, consequences of cryptocurrencies, both as a society, as a business, as users. But then we have folks across the street who work about the cybersecurity of blockchains. And we have folks across the street who are doing the algorithms that support a lot of these. And when you start these conversations, you send them an email and say, we want to work with the blockchain, and I heard that you're doing great work on this. They come immediately to the table, and we have students participating, we have student clubs coming in, we have our students who are doing research, students who are working in this area, we have researchers, because I think the CMU approach, the Tepper approach to sort of thinking problems like, bring it on. Let's think through this. Let's work together. How can we solve this problem? And that's what excites people. And it's been absolutely just amazing, because we can also entice them with this open space.
Right.
And we can entice them with some good food.
Indeed.
So it's been really, really, really handy to have this space. But I want to also really emphasize the fact that has always been the culture of the Tepper School and CMU.
It's clear. I hadn't
People
known.
People say it, but they don't
true.
until they see it,
And if they know the history, they will know it.
Exactly.
I mean, the fact that you have two founding fathers of artificial intelligence who are both members of the business school faculty years ago,
Right.
Herb Simon and his longtime colleague,
Right.
Alan Newell, right?
Yes.
I mean, that in and of itself is evidence of the interdisciplinary nature of the culture here
Absolutely.
that has existed for a long time.
Absolutely.
How does that happen, though? It just doesn't happen by circumstance, does it?
I think there's definitely sort of an institutional, a message. The institutional message when we hire new faculty, when we bring students in, the institutional message has always been, we don't want to silo you. We want you to do good work, whatever shape and form that takes. And if you're going to be a researcher and you're hired into computer science, or you're hired into the business school, but you're working across campus and publishing in outlets that are great engineering outlets, that are great social science outlets, go for it. The important thing is to think through problems and do good work that has impact on business, impact on society. And we try to bring all of our students along with the ride too, because we want them to understand that none of this gets solved and none of this really moves forward without having a very good diverse team on board who have not only complementary skills but very diverse opinions on how to solve problems.
Terrific.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to see you again.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
very
Thank
much
you.
for
Thank
talking
you.
with us.
Thank you.
Okay, Seven Yeltakin, Senior Associate Dean at Tepper School of Business. This is John Byrne with Pros and Quants. We're going to go back to the stage soon, and we're going to hear a keynote address by a top executive at Facebook who's in charge of their artificial intelligence initiative. So we'll be joining you after that for more commentary with panelists, with academics, leading business experts, and don't forget the students at Tepper who are going to be coming by during their lunchtime. See you soon.